Peter Falk brought that famous raincoat from his own closet. The wardrobe department told him no, and he wore it anyway. By the end of this, you'll know the casting rejections that nearly erased the show before it started, the character everyone remembers who never once appeared on screen, and what's written on a police badge that Falk spent decades pretending you hadn't noticed. Bing Crosby passed on the role because it conflicted with his golf schedule. The car Columbo drove was falling apart on purpose. That was the whole joke. And that catchphrase everyone quotes with such confidence, the show actually used it far less often than your memory is telling you right now. Start the clock.
She was not on her way to the dinner.
Number 10. The wife nobody ever saw. For an entire decade of television, Lieutenant Columbo mentioned his wife constantly. Her cooking, her opinions, her relatives, her genuinely terrible taste in television, and she never walked through a single door. Not once. Mrs. Columbo was the greatest recurring character in the show's history, who technically never existed on screen, and audiences spent years in genuine, affectionate debate about what she might actually look like. NBC eventually decided to answer the question. In 1979, they launched a spin-off called Mrs. Columbo, casting Kate Mulgrew, who would later become Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager, in the role. Peter Falk publicly disowned every frame of it, stating flatly that the character had nothing to do with his Columbo's wife. The show disappeared after one season. The version of Mrs. Columbo that lived in your imagination stayed completely intact.
That's a good thought, too, sir. No sense wasting your time on a dead end.
Number 9. The scheduling accident that built a classic. Columbo as a weekly series wasn't the result of a bold creative bet. The character first appeared in a 1960 stage play called Prescription Murder, then in a 1968 TV movie with Falk already in the role, and after that, NBC passed on making it a series. The show that defined an era almost ended as a curiosity nobody remembered. The opening came not from confidence, but from a scheduling problem. NBC needed content to fill rotating time slots in its NBC Mystery Movie Wheel format, which alternated different detective shows across the same night. Columbo got plugged in as one of the rotating pieces, which meant it didn't need immediate blockbuster ratings. It had time to find its audience, which it did, quietly and completely. A programming decision made in a meeting nobody bothered to commemorate ended up producing one of the most beloved characters in television history.
Oh, good morning, sir.
Morning.
Number 8. 35 years, one character, 4 decades of television. Most people file Columbo in the 1970s and move on. The actual timeline is considerably more staggering. The series ran from the 1968 TV movie through the original NBC run that ended in 1978. A revival in 1989, and then a full run of ABC TV movies that continued all the way to January 2003. Peter Falk was still playing Columbo at 75 years old. The final episode, Columbo Likes the Nightlife, aired 35 years after the character first appeared on television. No costume update required. Same coat, same car, same unhurried routine of making guilty people deeply uncomfortable. A viewer who watched the very first episode in 1968 as a young adult was firmly middle-aged by the time the finale aired.
Yes, sir, I'll have to take responsibility for that.
Number 7. The rust bucket that belonged among Rolls Royces. The car was a deliberate visual insult to every suspect Columbo ever visited. A 1959 Peugeot 403 Cabriolet, rusty, unreliable in appearance, completely incongruous, parked next to the Ferraris and Rolls Royces sitting in the driveways of the wealthy murderers it pulled up alongside. The contrast was the joke, and it landed with the same timing every single episode. What the show never announced was that the same physical car was used across the entire series run. It wasn't quietly swapped out for a cleaner model as budgets shifted and the show aged. The original battered Peugeot stayed. The car developed its own cultural weight entirely by being deliberately unfamous, an object that became iconic through consistent, cheerful shabbiness.
The water in her lungs. There were traces of soap.
Number 6. Just one more thing, the catchphrase that gaslighted a generation. Ask anyone who watched Columbo to quote the show's catchphrase, and they'll say, without hesitation, just one more thing, confidently. And they'll be partially wrong. Detailed episode analysis shows Columbo used that exact phrase far less frequently than collective memory insists, often substituting variations. Oh, and another thing, or simply doubling back without any phrase at all. The line got mythologized well beyond its actual frequency, which makes it one of the more effective psychological tricks in the show's history. Your brain filled in the blanks across years of viewing and never once flagged that it was doing it. This is what genuinely great characters do. They become more consistent in memory than they ever were on screen. The real Columbo was considerably more improvisational than the one you've been carrying around in your head.
Easy, under the table.
Number 5. The badge, the name, and the secret Falk pretended wasn't there. Throughout the entire series, Lieutenant Columbo has no first name. He is simply Columbo. No introduction, no visible paperwork, no nameplate held on screen long enough to read. Peter Falk maintained for decades that the character having no first name was essential to who he was. Then, sharp-eyed viewers notice something. In one episode, a police badge is briefly visible, and it appears to read Frank Columbo. The production team never officially confirmed whether that was intentional, a crew in-joke, or a genuine editing oversight that slipped through unnoticed. Falk kept insisting no first name existed. The badge kept sitting there in the frame, perfectly legible if you knew where to look. Whether Frank is the real answer or an elaborate accident has never been resolved.
Commissioner Halpin says he found those jewels under your mattress.
Number 4. The villains were the real stars all along. Every other detective show of the era built toward the moment the hero caught the criminal. Columbo opened with it. The audience watched the murder happen in full, met the killer entirely, understood their motive, and then spent 90 minutes at least partially rooting for the killer, as Columbo quietly closed the trap around them. The killers were invariably glamorous and intelligent. Conductors, surgeons, authors, diplomats, millionaires. Robert Culp appeared as 4 separate murderers across the series. Patrick McGoohan appeared 4 times and directed several episodes. Jack Cassidy played 3 distinct killers across 3 different seasons, each one charming, each one absolutely certain he'd won. The show essentially invented the prestige television villain 2 decades before cable made that idea fashionable, and it did it by trusting the audience to enjoy watching very smart people get comprehensively outwitted. That trust was never misplaced.
Don't do that to me, Sid.
Number 3. Bing Crosby chose golf over television. History. Before Peter Falk, the role of Lieutenant Columbo was offered to Bing Crosby. Crosby turned it down. The production schedule conflicted with his golf, so Bing Crosby chose golf. Lee J. Cobb was also considered and passed. 2 well-respected, established actors looked at this character and said no, and neither of them apparently spent much time second-guessing that decision. Peter Falk was eventually cast and spent the next 35 years demonstrating that no is occasionally the most consequential word in the entertainment business. Crosby and Cobb both had long, distinguished careers. Neither of them is who you picture when that theme music starts. The man who got the role because 2 other men didn't want it turned out to be the only person who could have played it.
That's why that window was open.
Number 2. The glass eye. He turned into a weapon. Peter Falk lost his right eye to cancer at age 3 and wore a glass prosthetic his entire life. Most actors would treat that as a private medical reality, kept well clear of their professional work. Falk did something different. He used it. Multiple accounts document that Falk could unsettle co-stars and generate genuinely unpredictable eye contact during scenes. The slightly off-center gaze that made Columbo's stare feel simultaneously distracted and completely locked onto you. Some directors considered it a core element in Columbo's ability to make guilty people nervous without ever raising his voice or his tempo. The physical reality Falk had navigated since early childhood became a precision instrument in his performance, and every actor who worked opposite him felt it, without quite being able to articulate why Columbo was so difficult to lie to convincingly.
And the boys down at the station, they said nobody could get at him.
Number 1. The coat from his own closet that ended up in the Smithsonian. There is no piece of clothing in detective television more immediately recognizable than Columbo's beige, wrinkled, thoroughly disreputable trench coat. Costume designers have studied it. Parody shows have reproduced it. It is simply the coat. And it was never supposed to be in the show at all. It doesn't appear in any production costume design documents. Peter Falk personally owned it, brought it to the set himself, and insisted it was right for the character. The wardrobe department pushed back. Falk held his ground, politely, persistently, with no apparent intention of letting the subject go, which is exactly how Columbo himself would have handled the same situation. He won. That coat, pulled from a working actor's personal wardrobe rather than a studio costume department, is now part of the permanent collection at the Smithsonian Institution. The garment that almost didn't survive the first day of production became the single most iconic prop across 50 years of television history. A rumpled coat from a man's own closet outlasted every perfectly designed costume in the business.
We should try. May I have a drum roll?
Bonus fact, the detective who couldn't get a government job. Before Peter Falk ever put on a raincoat, he applied to work for the CIA. They rejected him. He then spent several years as an efficiency expert for the Connecticut State Budget Bureau, a government administrator by day, doing theater at night whenever the opportunity came up. The man who would spend 35 years playing television's most effective investigator was deemed unsuitable for actual government intelligence work. and spent his early career auditing state budgets while fitting in stage performances around the edges. His path to Columbo ran directly through a bureaucratic rejection and a day job that had nothing to do with acting. The CIA's loss was television's gain, which sounds like a line someone made up, except it's just what happened. Columbo ran for 35 years because one man refused to accept a network pass, brought his own coat to the job, and inhabited a character so deceptively ordinary that every murderer underestimated him completely, which was, of course, the entire plan from the beginning.
The question worth sitting with is which detail landed hardest? Was it the coat now sitting in the Smithsonian, the badge that Falk spent decades pretending you hadn't seen, or the wife, who generated more genuine conversation than any character who actually appeared on screen? Drop it in the comments. We'll be back next week with another vault entry, and we'll leave the door unlocked. Just one more thing. Thanks for watching.